Vamos a dar inicio ao dia com uma primeira sessão que a ideia disto é que não tem melhor forma de saber como uno é, senão mostrar-se no espelho, ou olhar-se no espelho dos vizinhos. Então, temos convidado a destacados jornalistas da América Latina um pouco para explorar como se olha o Brasil desde fora. Temos a Rossana Fuentes Berain, que é diretora do Grupo Editorial Expansión de México, que é o grupo de jornalismo de economia e negócios mais destacados lá. Temos a Alvaro Sierra, que é o Deputy Editor da revista Semana de Colombia, o Alejandro Santos, que teve um problema de saúde. Então, agradecemos muito a Álvaro por haver vindo. E temos a Carlos Eduardo Lins da Silva, que é muito conhecido a vocês, esteve em Valor Econômico, depois como ombudsman da Folha e agora é diretor do Observatório da Imprensa e trabalha também na FAPESP aqui. E o formato desta sessão é um pouco experimental. Posto que todos somos jornalistas, achamos que vamos entrevistar cada aos outros. É novo significado do término entrevista coletiva. Então, vou começar convidando a Rossana Fuentes Berain a ver o cenário. Rossana.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here in front of our Brazilian friends. I'm going to use English, not because of my vicinity with the United States, but because I cannot speak Portuguese. I can sing Portuguese maybe, but I cannot speak Portuguese.
Very good. Well, at the end of the day, you can sing Portuguese. That's what we're all going to do. But Rossana, let's start by, in Brazil, one often hears this description of Mexico as a neo-colony of the United States that's sold its national industry to Americans and so forth. How does Mexico return the compliment to Brazil?
Well, we see you as a wannabe big boy in a very convoluted area. We see Brazil when we see Brazil in the Mexican press, which is not very often, to be honest. I think that as far as I did the research for this conference, I could find 3 topics of which the Mexican press talked about in regards to Brazil. Football, football, and football. And cars. Now, the 3 topics are, of course, yes, football, soccer, and former President Lula is a rock star figure in our country. He's well liked. He goes around giving speeches and participating in various forums, and so he's listened to, and he's warm, and Mexican politicians are happy to have him out of office, giving general lectures about what we do.
Is his appeal just to the left in Mexico, or does it go beyond that?
It goes beyond that. He has an appeal with the PRI, which is a party that can encompass left, right, and center. and is very chameleonic. To be in power for 70 years.
It's the Mexican PMDB, no?
Correct. To be in power for 70 years, you have to be very flexible, to say the least. And they are back in office starting December the 1st. President Lula, or former President Lula, is certainly representative of something that we feel vis-a-vis Brazil in many senses, which is this idea of a dysfunctional family. Aren't they all, by definition? But this Latin American family, in regards to Mexico and Brazil, we see a rivalry between us, because we're the two big ones in the family. And President Lula is really seen as the chief marketing officer rather than the president.
That's interesting. I mean, I'm also interested when you say that really the only, apart from Lula, the only thing that the Mexican media reports about Brazil is football. I mean, is that ignoring of Brazil because in the last 10 years, Mexico has tended to ignore the rest of the region in general? Or is it because Brazil is easy to ignore if you're in Mexico?
Brazil is too far away from us. When you have a border like the one we share with the United States, it's the border between a country of the northern part of the world and the southern part of the world, the north-south, that you and I learned at school. It's the place where you have that kind of border. So we are, in fact, obsessed, in a sense, by that neighborhood. And it's easy to ignore Brazil because we do so little in terms of trade, in terms of bilateral relationship, the way that we needed to organize around regional issues like we did in the 80s in Central America was gone after the Berlin Wall fell. And so it was easy to ignore, and economically speaking, which I think most of our audience is interested in that, we parted ways to forget the idea, the proposition of South-South trade after the Berlin Wall fell, and everybody started looking for its own space in the new geopolitical arrangements. We went in different directions. The history is proving that neither of those directions per se was the best way to go, because if you take the numbers, the similarities of economic growth make us think that each went in a different direction. Mexico, certainly, as you did your provocation, became very much a close ally to the US. And manufacturing in the US, in the northern part of the American continent, in the US, cannot be understood without thinking about Mexican manufacturing.
Okay, Brazil always talks about South America because it sees that as a way of consolidating a bloc in which it is by far the most dominant country. As you say, closer engagement between Mexico and Brazil could potentially be very positive for the region as a whole. Under the return of the PRI with Enrique Peña Nieto as the new president, the PRI has always been more interested in Latin America than the PAN was.
Correct.
Do you see potential for a closer engagement at any level between Mexico and Brazil in the next few years?
The president-elect started with an international tour to Latin America. The country that he first visited was Guatemala, which is our neighbor. But then he came to the rest of what we call the southern, the Cono Sur, the southern cone. And yes, I see a potential, because they are very much interested in following two projects that have been successful in Brazil. Or that's the way we see it. I would love to hear if the Brazilians think that they have been very successful. Petrobras, Pemex, the Mexican oil company in Mexico, has lagged behind, and it's very symbolic and has not been touched. And the other one is the Banco de Desarrollo Brasileño. That is being looked at with admiration and with interest on the part of the PRI.
Well, we're going to hear from the chief executives of both Petrobras and the BNDES this morning, so maybe you'll get some answers there. Just lastly, you reminded me this morning that we had a blog post recently expressed in football terms, Mexico 4, Brazil 2, and this refers to the expected rates of growth in the economy this year, and in fact 2 is charitable to Brazil. It's 1.5. Is there a danger of Mexican triumphalism?
There is always a danger of Mexican triumphalism vis-a-vis Brazil. We have some good perspectives vis-a-vis what I was talking about, the manufacturing with a US component, and also the energy prices in China and the labor prices in China that are going up. So,
I mean, this openness that you have in Mexico and a wide open economy has often been criticized, but some people would say it's actually proving its value now.
We certainly are looking forward to having more trade. The big question mark for us now is with whom? Because if we keep on concentrating so much in the US, that's a disadvantage for us in many ways. But then I would ask the Brazilians, are you going to stress that you're going to trade with Europe? And who within Europe? With Asia, the Chinese seem to be sort of at a point in their economy where they are facing a lot of unknown patterns of how that kind of system is going to work. So I would say that we're both the big two in Latin America. We are both facing a little bit of uncharted waters because we don't know basically what's in store for us. And we'll sort it out together, I suppose.
Okay, well, at this point, I'm going to hand over to you to talk to the potential number 3 in Latin America, Colombia, which is number 4 at the moment, but coming up fast. So
thank you so much, Michael.
So thank you, Rossana. And Alvaro, if you could come up, please. I'm sorry.
Gracias, Rossana.
Thank you so much. And yes, when there are two big brothers that are competing to be number 1 on a family, there's always number 3 or number 4. I don't know about your family arrangements, but certainly in many Mexican families like myself, like my own, we have this competition between the different ages and stages of development. And Colombia and Mexico are facing something that I read about in the press in regards to Brazil, but is certainly more tied to our countries. And you have guessed already, I'm talking about drug trafficking. Yesterday there was a piece at the New York Times about São Paulo. But basically, the coverage of drug trafficking is mostly related to your country and mine. Let me ask you about how do you see the coverage of the trade, the narco-traffic trade, vis-a-vis Brazil in your newspapers? And is that the main thing that is spoken about Brazil or not?
No. I would say no by far. It's a topic, not a very important one. I will explain in a minute why. The first thing, and I would agree with what you said first to Michael a few minutes ago, it's one of the specifics of Latin America, and it's a very strange thing, is in Colombia, and I would say that is almost true for most of Latin American countries. In the press in our countries, we have more coverage about the US, Europe, and for example now the Middle East or Iran, than about the Latin American countries. There is a big amount of lack of knowledge and lack of information about our own countries. And this is true not just for politics and so on, but also for the coverage of the drug trafficking. A major story in the Colombian press about the drug business and Brazil was published like 10 years ago, 9 years ago, when a major trafficker, a Brazilian trafficking guy, was captured in the eastern jungles of Colombia. He was making some deals with the FARC, our insurgency in Colombia, exchanging drugs for guns and ammunition. But this is it. I mean, few people in Colombia know that drugs are a major problem in Brazil. And the only thing that more recently has made the news about this issue is the Latin American Commission on Drugs, because you have President Cedillo from Mexico, former President Cardoso, and former President Gaviria from Colombia. And this was an initiative that had some amount of press back in 2008, 2009, when it was promoted. And then it kind of faded away. And now, with President Santos and the president of Guatemala and some other people speaking more loudly about the need of reviewing the current policy on drugs, it has become more of an issue. But it's more a general issue than a Brazilian issue in the Colombian press.
Talk to us, please, about how do you see the coverage of economic opportunities, investments, Brazilian investments in Colombia, and how do you see the coverage of the Brazilian model of dividing its exports and its relationship with China?
Mm-hmm. Well, perhaps the main story in this frame of a general lack of information about Brazil in Colombia, but perhaps the main story, as in the rest of the world, about Brazil is the story of economics. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Brazil has been, I mean, the relationship between Brazil and Colombia was, I mean, we were just next and period, nothing else. I mean, not just because of the huge Amazon jungle in between the civilized, the urban parts of both countries, but historically, in the past century, the relationship was almost non-existent. Yeah, no major economic ties, no straight ways of communications and these kind of things. Since the beginning of 2000, this began to change, and it began to change in a good part because both Brazil and Colombia began to develop a more dynamic economic relationship. I mean, trade, which was completely marginal, is now more important, not huge, not big, but it has become an important issue, and investment has become an important issue. I mean, Petrobras investment in Colombia, you have synergy having both the main Colombian line. This kind of ties, of economic ties, gave some ground to more economic coverage in Colombia about Brazil. Who's this big guy who's coming and selling us things and buying companies here, investing significant amounts of money in Colombia? That's the way the economic story is being developed in Colombia. Although I would insist, there is a huge lack of knowledge about Brazil, and the image that it is as big as unknown for most Colombians.
Let me ask you about a family name that is from Mexican origin, but is present and prevalent both in Colombia and Brazil, Mr. Slim. Is it covered as a multilateral force? And do you see, when you write stories about the Mexican entrepreneur that is going around telecommunications in the region, as a force that comes from Mexico or from Brazil? And I ask this because he's stressing the fact that he's going from Brazil towards the region.
Yeah, but not in Colombia. I mean, trademark is Slim, and for Colombians and in the Colombian media, it's a Mexican trademark, okay, not a Brazilian one. In most of Latin America, the mobile operation of Mr. Slim is called Claro.
Claro.
In Colombia, it was called until 2.5 months ago Comcel for years. And only now they became Claro, and it became Claro, in Spanish is clear. It became clear for Colombians, I mean, for normal people on the street, that it was part of a huge regional operation, at least. So Slim is a Mexican trademark in Colombia, not a Brazilian one.
And let me ask you a final one that has to do with the current situation in vis-a-vis negotiations with the FARC. In Brazil, they have a tradition of introducing into their political scene, and President Rousseff is an example of that, former guerrillas, and now have a long tradition of peace. What is happening in your country, and how are you portraying that, and how will you cover that?
You mean the peace process in Colombia?
The peace process.
Yeah. That has little to do with Brazil. This is perhaps the first time in 10 years that there is some kind of optimism in Colombia about the possibility of more or less quickly having a peace deal with the FARC. I mean, you know, the Colombian conflict has been going on for almost half a century, and the past 10 years have been years of war, of the government and the official forces waging a major campaign, military campaign, against the FARC, which has weakened the FARC quite a lot. And now, for the first time in those 10 years, there is a possibility of having a negotiation and signing a peace agreement. That would mean a lot for Colombia and for the region, and I would say it would have some meaning for Brazil also. Brazil has played an important role in specific moments as an intermediary, for example, when the possibility of freeing Ingrid Betancourt, a politician that had been kidnapped by the FARC, arose. At that point, Brazil was helping a deal to be cut through. This didn't work, but Brazil, for the Colombian government and in the media, I would say that has also to do with the perception of how Brazil plays some role in Colombia, has been seen as some kind of, to use a football term, of reserve, someone sitting on the bench for any possibility of peace. And at this moment, Brazil is playing no role at all, but it could play some in the near future in this process, which has been so far mostly a Colombian thing without important foreign intermediaries.
Our time is almost out, but I would very much want to share after this with the audience the idea that this soccer idea that somebody's sitting on the bench and waiting for the rest of the team to sort out its own act, and then be part of a winning team, which I think is indeed the case for the rest of for Latin America and our countries vis-a-vis the rest of the world. I'm going to leave the stage and ask my colleague from Brazil to come up and share with you some other stories. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Olá, Álvaro.
Now is my time to torment you with a few questions.
Good, thank you.
The first thing is, I mean, you listen, Rossana spoke about rivalry between Mexico and Brazil. I tried to convey the message of Brazil is, for most Colombians, an unknown quantity in many areas. How conscious are the Brazilians about how they are perceived in the region? Which are the main images the Brazilians think the Latin Americans have about themselves?
I think that Brazilians usually do not concern themselves very much with these kind of questions. Most Brazilians, I mean. I think that Brazil is very similar to the United States in many aspects. One of them, it's a country that's very much moved by itself. Mm-hmm. It's a country that is concerned more with itself than others. This changed a lot after Mercosur. I think Mercosur is a turning point in the relationships of Brazil with its neighbors. And things have been much better in terms of mutual knowledge, or at least the Brazilian knowledge of our neighbors after Mercosur, with all the problems that Mercosur has been facing since the beginning, and especially in the last few years. In relation to Colombia specifically, I think that we had some interest on Colombia, especially the people from the city of São Paulo, during the experiences that former Mayor Mocos made in Bogota. And they were seen in Brazil, they were perceived in Brazil as very successful. I don't know if that's true or not, you can tell me better, but it was perceived in Brazil that with those initiatives that were so much different from the normal, he probably was able to make the crime rate go down, the traffic fatalities go down as well, more people having sewage and the water systems, and so on. And when he ran for the presidency in 2010 or 9? 10. He was also a character here in the Brazilian press for some time, because on the same year we had a Green Party candidate, Marina Silva, who also was relatively successful, and some people perceived some relationship between Marina Silva and former Mayor Mocos.
You say the Brazilian probably don't care much about how they are perceived, but with all these economic dynamics, and which means a necessary integration into a global stage, Brazil has, for example, huge plans in Southern America. Yeah, kind of Brazil is focused in Southern America, and Mexico more looking up north. The perception, I would say, we have not just in Colombia, but for example in the Andean region, in Venezuela even, is that if Brazil wants a kind of South American influence, it is too much focused on Mercosur. Mm-hmm. Would you agree that that can be kind of an obstacle to develop a more close, more dynamic relationship with the rest of the subcontinent?
Yeah, as you see, I think that the moment when Brazil started to assume the role of influential in South America was in the year 2000, when President Cardoso convened the first South American summit. Mm-hmm. It's incredible that until the 21st century, never before all presidents or heads of state of South America had met. That moment, it looked to me that it was a moment when Brazil was finally trying to be a character of more influence in South America. The fact is that the economic difficulties of all countries retarded this process. It did not go as fast and as deep as we thought it would in 2000 during that summit. right now, you're right. I think that Brazil is much more concentrated in Mercosur than in the rest of the subcontinent. But right now, we are facing a big trouble in Mercosur itself. And when I said that Brazilians are not very concerned with the image we have in our neighbors' communities, I'm talking about the vast majority of Brazilians. But of course, the public opinion makers, they are concerned. And I think we are not enough concerned with the crisis that we have right now in Mercosur. This exclusion of Paraguay, I think, may hurt the Brazilian relation with Paraguay itself and with other neighbors very much and for a long time. I never could imagine that we would see the president of Paraguay going to the United Nations General Assembly and denouncing Brazil for genocide. Remember our last war 170 years ago. But it shows how there are still feelings that are bad towards Brazil in Paraguay and probably in other countries. My opinion is that we are not paying Brazil, not even among the public opinion makers, not even in the press, we are not paying enough attention to the gravity, how serious is this crisis that we are facing now with Paraguay, specifically with Mercosur in general.
Yeah, one common initiative by former presidents, we just mentioned it briefly when talking with Rossana, was the Latin American Commission on Drugs. I mean, that was kind of the seed planted a few years ago for a debate that is kind of taking off and growing and becoming more important. Mr. Cardoso's participation has been key in the commission. I would like to ask you about, there is a certain way of in Colombia, in Guatemala, in the countries that are promoting the discussion now, there is a certain amount of question about, well, what will be the Brazilian position in this complex, difficult issue and debate. What would you say about, besides the participation of a former president, the Brazilian government will play a role in the discussion, or it will just stand by and with a wait-and-see position?
I hope it will. I doubt it will. My position has always been, as the Economist's position and your publication's position as well, that the best way to deal with drugs is to legalize them. But unfortunately, I believe that the majority of the Brazilian society does not agree with this position. President Cardoso has been, as you said, fundamental in this effort, and I hope he can convince at least part of the Brazilian government to be more active in this business.
Do you think, I'm changing completely topics, do you think that Brazil has an image problem in some parts of Latin America? I mean, you say Brazilians do not care, but the fact is that image counts. And when you begin to get into other countries to invest, to trade, to do things, your image is of paramount importance.
Yeah, I think we have. I think we have an image. I think it's important. I think we have an image problem. I think it's important to be concerned about image. And as I said before, I think that this problem can worsen in the near future with this situation in Mercosur. I remember that when President Clinton was in power, the American government tried very much to convince the Brazilian government, then led by President Cardoso, to be more involved in the FARC situation in Colombia. And I remember very vividly that President Cardoso and his foreign minister, Lampreia, did not want to involve Brazil very much in that situation. As you said, it would prefer to be on the bench for the case of a bigger need. Brazil has always been very careful in not showing itself very eager to exercise power over the rest of South America or Latin America. I think that it was wise. During President Lula's administration, my opinion is that we went perhaps too far in showing ourselves as leaders. This, of course, hurts people, hurts other governments. It's incredible that Brazil wants so much to be a permanent member of the Security Council of the UN, but we do not have the support from Mexico.
Yeah,
we don't have the support from Argentina. Now we don't have the support of Paraguay. So it's a claim that I believe will be very difficult to achieve with this kind of image problem that we have with our neighbors.
Okay, Carlos, I thank you. We have time has run out, so I have to invite Michael again to interview, for you to interview him.
I will interview him.
Many thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Michael, I spent a good deal of my life since 1975 explaining or trying to explain Brazil to foreigners in the US and Europe. And until only 4 or 5 years ago, my mantra was, Brazil is not as bad as you think. In the last 5 years, I have to say Brazil is not as good as you think. And I believe that this change in the perception of Brazil abroad is very much due to publications like yours, which is respected and well-read by everybody in the whole world. And in 2009, as we all know, you published that cover, Brazil takes off with the Christ the Redeemer as a rocket. But only 3 years later, you, The Economist, the Financial Times, the New York Times, everybody is saying that Brazil is almost done. Do you think that the international press, the best international press, exaggerated when Brazil was put as the big star, or they are exaggerating now, saying that Brazil is doomed? Of course, I am exaggerating now in the reflection of the press view of Brazil.
No, but it's a fair point, and you know, we have to take responsibility for that cover, and I'm happy to do so because you know, Carlos, that a cover works if it has one message. If you start trying to put in nuances, maybes, buts, however's, on the other hand, forget it. So what we wanted to put across in that cover in November 2009 was that largely overlooked by the outside world. And I would say that the New York Times at the time, just to have a little swipe at the competition, was mainly still writing about street children, samba, deforestation, etc. We were saying, look, something serious and important of world significance has been happening in Brazil over the last 10 years. And the world had been slow to take notice of it. The world continued to see Brazil as bad. And the next year, Brazil grew at 7.5%. So, I don't think we were wrong. The other thing I would say is that a cover has a simple image, a simple message. Anybody who opened The Economist and read the leading article that accompanied the cover would have seen that the first half noted and celebrated the achievements of Brazil, and then it said, but. And then there were all the problems that we think Brazil has and needs to tackle. And those are still there. Some of them are starting to be tackled, but they're complex. It's never easy anywhere in a large democracy to do that. And just finally, I would say that I think that in journalism, as in markets, there's a tendency to overshooting. I think that there has been an entirely predictable reputational backlash of Brazil because the world was slow to wake up to what had been happening. I think there was some exaggeration. I don't think we exaggerated, but I think other people did exaggerate. And so inevitably people have gone to the other extreme. I don't think we have gone to the other extreme. What we've said is Brazil, and we quoted a fund manager on this, that he said he was selectively bullish on Brazil. And that, I think, is a good summary of our position, because we think there are underlying strengths in the country as well as things that need to be tackled.
We all know, Michael, that the image of a country is made up by several actors: diplomats, market analysts, journalists, soccer stars, artists. Who do you think is the most important actor in the case of Brazil for making the Brazilian image? For instance, do you think what's more influential, a cover like The Economist or an article by Ruchir Sharma in Foreign Affairs saying that things are very bad? What's the most important or most effective actor?
Well, I would say the most important actor is always the underlying reality in the first place, and that images that are constructed that are out of kilter with the underlying reality don't last. Yeah? Second, I would say that, and Rossana said this, she put it very well, I thought, that President Lula was an extraordinary ambassador for Brazil. Now, as you said, he may have exaggerated. But, and then to answer more specifically your question, I think there are distinct publics, aren't there? I mean, we reach several million people who are kind of international, who have an interest in the world. The article by Ruchir Sharma in Foreign Affairs, I think, had an impact because it hit a nerve. And I think it was partly right, but it had some gross mistakes. And a lot of the analysis was wrong, but some of the things it said was right. I think that has an impact in a more limited, I mean, you just look at the circulations. I mean, you and I know that circulation matters. It's not the only thing that matters, and that if you like, the quality of readership matters as well, but circulation matters.
But an article like Sharma's then is talked about in other media, and maybe his ideas, because of how influential the foreign affairs is, may have a circulation that's even bigger than the circulation of The Economist.
No, that's right. I mean, journalists are also guilty of herd behavior, like markets. But I also think, and I go back to the first point of the last answer, that I think images depend on realities. And I think the more that people look at the reality behind what Sharma says, they will find that, as I say, some of what he said was right, but some of it was wrong.
But reality, of course, is also a perception. I mean, depends on whom you talk to, you will have a different description of reality. I was a foreign correspondent, and you were a foreign correspondent. Do you think that a foreign correspondent of the United States or UK, as you were, living in a country where most people do not speak English, can this correspondent be somewhat deceived by the fact that most of the people he will talk to about the reality will be English-speaking people who probably will have a kind of distorted vision of reality because of his social status?
Well, that's an obvious risk. I mean, I think I would say that if we had a correspondent like that who carried on being like that after a year or two, we would sack them. I mean, I think that learning the language of the country where you are based is essential, even if you end up speaking it badly. But the important thing is to understand it and to understand the way of thinking that is expressed in a different language. And I also think it's a basic task for a foreign correspondent to be conscious of that trap and to try and give as much value to the view of the country that somebody who lives in a favela in Acre or Fortaleza has as the people who live in Brasilia or the people who live in Jardins or in Leblon. And that is our job. It's our job to try and listen to all those views of the country and weigh them up and try and both reflect all those views, but also derive a kind of synthetic whole from them. And that's why it's such a wonderful, exciting, intellectually marvelous job. Yeah?
It is, and I must say that The Economist has been always doing a great job concerning Brazil. I read The Economist every week since I can read English, and I'm perfectly satisfied with the coverage that you have been doing.
Well, thank you very much, but let me return the compliment, because the other thing I failed to say was that, obviously for any foreign correspondent, the local media is a crucial ingredient and input. And I think Brazil's lucky that it has pretty good media by world standards.
Great, we have just finished our time.
Thank you. Thank you, Carlos Eduardo. I'm now going to go back to the role of moderator and ask Rossana and Alvaro to come and join us, and we're going to open up this to all of you for questions. We have, I think, 10 minutes, yes? And so please could you put your hand up if you'd like to ask a question. Please could you indicate if it's to anybody in particular, and please could you also identify yourself. Any questions out there? Yeah, is that one at the back there? Come on, I know it's early in the morning, but you
over there on the left.
Your brain cells can't be completely there.
Michael, there over there.
There's one over there. Thank you. Yeah. Who is it? That's the microphone. Well, the microphone's not going to be able to ask a question on its own, is it? It needs some help. So
it's better we ask questions. So we do that better.
Well, yeah, it's okay. Thank you very much. We've got two now. They're like London buses. You get none, and then they all come together.
Hello. Good morning to all. Apologies for using English, but I think it's a common language. My name is Pablo Armando Gon. I work for Hancock Natural Resources. We invest in trees and land and such, and also in Brazil. So that's my identity. The question is the following. I've been hearing a lot about the possibility, the need, or how much is Brazil marketing itself outside of Brazil and the rest of Latin America. So for all of you, does Brazil have a need to market itself, to attract others, investors, people coming here, need for others to understand Brazil and what's happening here? Thank you.
I'm going to put that to Rossana and Alvaro, actually, I think.
Well, yes, because there is an unknown country for us. So you do have to invest. I don't know in your particular field, but I know of other fields in which you want to do business in a country, and you need to get out of what is the easiest and very simple way of portraying your country. Let's talk about energy. We know little about Petrobras, and if and when there's an opening on the Mexican energy sector, I'm sure that some Brazilian companies, maybe some of those sitting in this conference, would like to participate on some of the contracts. And for that to happen, yes, I think that you need to talk more and maybe invest more in getting a deeper knowledge of what Brazil is towards the Mexicans that will have a decision of whatever they need to do with the opening of the Mexican energy sector.
Mm-hmm.
Alvaro?
Yeah, I would answer yes, undoubtedly. I mean, you can be big, you can be huge, but in the world today, this is, by itself, this is not enough. I think that one of the things that has taken place, one of the things that's happening now is Brazil has one of the most fantastic marketing tools in the world, President Lula. I mean, Colombia is a very good example of that. In the years that Mr. Lula was the president, the relationship between Colombia and Brazil changed a lot. These were really the years when it changed. And a lot of it was helped, promoted, pushed on by the president and his image. After Lula, I think this has changed. And this wonderful marketing tool is missing. I'm not speaking, of course, I mean, President Rousseff is also a voice of Brazil in the world, but there is a difference on the character, on the way the president sells his country in the best sense of the word. And I do think that although, as Carlos was talking when we were talking together, although Brazil is big enough to do not care, it should care about image and about how to take care of shaping its image abroad.
Carlos Eduardo, do you think Brazil should still be looking to Lula to be its ambassador in chief for the world, or does it need to find new ones now?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think that President Lula, of course, has several qualities, and he is a great and impressive leader. But I think that in foreign affairs specifically, although he was such a good marketer of Brazil, he made many mistakes that I would not like to be repeated. And I will not describe these mistakes because it would take too long.
Okay, we have one at the back there. The gentleman with the grey suit.
Good morning. My name is Marco Franca, president of Pier Newswire in Brazil. In reality, what I have is not really a question, it's more of a statement.
Can you make it a brief one?
Of course, but it turns into a question. In reality, Brazil, if it wants an image beyond the 5 S's, which are soccer, samba, sun, sex, and speed, it needs to market itself. As we see right now, businesses, particularly businesses and government, do a horrendous job of doing any marketing overseas. If we look at Mexico, Mexico does a wonderful job, the companies in Mexico, of marketing itself to Asia, to everywhere else. But Brazilians do not. We at Pier Newswire process tons of releases a month. 0.005% come from Brazil. So in reality, what is it that Brazilians need to do to learn so that they can communicate more outside of Brazil rather than looking internally, which was stated before?
Carlos Eduardo, very quickly.
Very quickly, I think we should have an effort, a concerted effort by government and private companies to show Brazil abroad, not only to the media, but also to foreign governments and legislatives.
There's a question here, Charles Tang at the front here.
Hi, my name is Charles Tang. I'm the chairman of the Brazil-China Chamber of Commerce. I think that more should be covered in the media about the tremendous transformation that's happening right now in Brazil. President Dilma is doing something that Brazil has never done before, tackling the Brazil cost. Although still very timidly, but she's starting to tackle the cost of interest rates, the taxes, and so on. Secondly, there's a tremendous stimulus package of rebuilding or building up the Brazilian infrastructure. Of course, I believe that the Chinese will have a lot to, will participate in this, mainly in the, investing with the capital into the rebuilding or building up the Brazilian infrastructure. I think Brazil will change a lot.
What's the question, Charles? What's the question?
The question is, this tremendous transformation of perception, of economic perception in Brazil, and this tremendous potential that Brazil will have next year in the stimulus, shouldn't it be more reported on or written up on by the media?
Rossana, do you think Mexican media will write more about Brazil and about some of these kinds of things?
Yes, it should report more, but I think that you refer to the idea of the local media and how much you care or don't care about how are you covered by other countries. And I think that one of the sins within, I would add that S to your list, as the sin of the hubris of being too big and too inward-looking is something that we can see in Brazil because of the big nature of the country. And you should start thinking that it's in your interest to make an effort, going back to your idea, to present a story and a narrative that can be written about, be it in a concerted way by public and private entities that carry the word around what you're referring to, the cost revolution, or be it just by the fact that some of your industries would like to do business with other places, and you have to start talking to us, to the press around the world, not in, I'm sorry, with your public relations department, but not in press releases, but in real dialogue, which is how we would like to engage in conversation with entities.
Very quickly, Alvaro, do you expect to be writing more about Brazil? Should you be writing more about Brazil, and about what?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there is a need for that. I do agree with Rossana's comment. The point is, taken as a whole, Brazil is an underreported story. But even though the potential the gentleman speaks about, the Brazilian economic story is the most reported part. My feeling is that we have to focus more, for example, on companies, on specific companies. In Colombia, very few people know really about Petrobras, for example. We have been buying small combat planes from Embraer. People know very little about Embraer as a major aviation company. So I do believe that the focus has to move from the general potential or economic story about Brazil to more specific topics about the economy and other areas.
Yeah, that's a very important point, actually. I mean, Brazil may not have engaged as President Clinton wanted in Colombia, but the balance of military power in Colombia would not have changed in the way that it has without the Super Tucano, which has been absolutely fundamental in the Colombian conflict. We have to leave it there. Thank you so much to all three of you, colleagues, for what's been a very interesting and rich session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.